Okay, again, welcome to the Purpose of this Book with David G. and David G. Where we are is we are early in Chapter 7, Working with Others, and I was not here last week, but Ashton filled in along with David and got through the bottom of 91, that paragraph that stretches into the top of 92, but they got into that kind of late. So we're just going to start back over on that one at the very bottom of 91, but I think David had a little recap before we roll into the new content.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, someone brought it up at the end of the meeting last week about something that's written on page 58 of our big book and that I had brought up when we sit there. So we're in Working with Others, and this is the time that I get to share my drunkalog, right, with the new person. Bill gives us directions to do that throughout this whole chapter, and especially in the early parts of the chapter that, so we can be relatable. Because, I mean, I'm looking around this room, I don't know, I don't think anyone here looks like an alcoholic. You look like lovely, beautiful people. I don't know what an alcoholic looks like, but that's not my vision of what one looks like. So when I share on page 58, when I look at the book, it says, and how it works, that we share our stories, what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. That's in a general way it talks about. And it's in the second paragraph. So for me, it means when I share like that, what my life used to be like when I ran my life on my own free will, what happened when I had this spiritual revelation, and what it's like now when I'm trying to align my will with God's will today. And what I mean by that is because if you go to page 50 of our book in the second paragraph, in We Agnostics, if you want to follow along here. So when I'm at the podium, so this is different than sitting one-on-one with another alcoholic. This is just me. This does not need to be you. I'm not giving any direction here. Just sharing my experience because I shared this a little bit last week, and I sat at the podium early in sobriety and shared a 45-minute drunkalog and realized I had about 5 minutes left, and I talked about I have a sponsor and I worked a couple steps, and here I am in a meeting, and there was really no clear-cut message there. But if I look at We Agnostics here, in the page 50 in the second paragraph, kind of gives me some direction what I should probably be sharing from the podium. Now, again, this is not one-on-one with working with another. In our personal stories, we will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. So that is, how did I get a relationship with power? When did I realize that I was powerless over alcohol? Did I concede to my innermost self that I was a real alcoholic? Do I desperately need power? Do I desperately need Alcoholics Anonymous, OA, drug, DA, cocaine anonymous, whatever it is? And then what does my life look like today with a conscious contact with God? So I'm sharing my experience at the podium with my relationship with God is a lot. I really don't do a drunkalog because there's nothing fun about my drunkalog, nothing for me anyways. But here in Working with Others, this is the perfect opportunity to help them identify that I am a real alcoholic, just like him. Hopefully that he can see, that I drank like me, he thought like me, and maybe he felt like me. So I'm trying to get him to line up with those three things.
Okay, thanks, David. So we're going to pick it up here, bottom of 91. Here we go. When he sees you know all about the drinking game, commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Tell him how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink of a spree. We suggest you do this as we have done it in the chapter on alcoholism. If he is an alcoholic, he will understand you at once. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own.
Have you got anything for us? No? Okay. So the bottom of that page in 94, where David started out, it says, when he sees you know all about the drinking game. So I'm armed with the facts about myself. I've studied this book, at least up to this portion of the book, so I can take him through the work, meaning the 12 steps. Commence to describe myself as an alcoholic. I am not here to diagnose him as an alcoholic necessarily, not yet anyways. So I'm just to describe myself as an alcoholic. And then the next paragraph on page 92, it kind of gives us, well, it gives us a great description of where I'm going to find that at in the chapter of on alcoholism. But the top of the page on 92 says, tell him how baffled you were and how you finally learned that you were sick. So what does sick mean? The sick means the spiritual malady talking about. So I always thought that I just had a drinking problem. I never knew that I had this malady, this unmanageability in my life. I never knew anything about that until I started studying the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So the problem is, this is on powers over alcohol. That's a problem. But the problem is that my life is unmanageable. And then it says, give him an account of your struggles you made to stop. So give him the account of your struggles you made to stop, meaning, what was I willing to go to any lengths? Did I get myself a Big Book sponsor? Did I go ahead and get some sort of conception of a God or a power greater than myself? Call it whatever you want to call it. And then show him the mental twist which led to the first drink of her spree. That is that peculiar twist that they talk about. I think it's on page 41, I believe it is in Fred's story. But I'll get to that in a second. But what we're talking about here is the obsession. The thought that turned into an obsession. So the thought was I could have a drink, and then it became an obsession, and it overrode all my thinking. Without my permission, without my consent, I picked up a drink. So that is the mental twist that they're talking about that led to the first drink. So the obsession has to come in first before I have the allergy, the craving. We suggest to you that this. We suggest you do this as we have done in the chapter on alcoholism. So that would be back on page 44 in the first paragraph. Halfway through the paragraph, we take statements David and I do, and we turn them into questions. And it starts out on, this is the chapter we agnostics. If when you honestly want to, so David, when you honestly want to, do you find you cannot quit entirely? This is the obsession in the mind. Or when you're drinking, you have little control. That's the allergy, the phenomenon of the craving. Little control over the amount you take. That is of the body. Then you're probably alcoholic. That is pretty clear cut for me. So back to the original text on page 92 here then. Then it says, he will understand you at once. So if I explain to him that without my permission, without my consent, when I had a thing that I had to do, a job that I had to finish, an appointment, a date with my wife, whatever the case was, the thought came into my mind, it became an obsession, it override all my good thoughts, it filled up the whole screen. I picked up the drink, I broke out in craving. He will understand at once if he's a real alcoholic. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. So some of these, I will let David go, and then maybe I'll double back a little bit. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Jim's story, Fred's story, and the man of 30, and see if we relate to that in the same way that this guy would be able to relate to me.
Yeah, so I'm sure I'm going to double down on some points that David made last week, but since I didn't get to cover the last couple of pages, I'm sort of struck again as we look at this paragraph, guys, how we're supposed to carry this out, to go out and carry the message. It's not a riddle. It's really here in black and white. If we just take our time and read slowly and study, and study with someone who's a little bit more familiar with the book, like in this particular paragraph. It tells me exactly what to do. Commence to describe myself as an alcoholic. So call myself an alcoholic and repeat what that means. Tell them how baffled I was. So like if you took all this content that really goes back on the top of page 90, you could distill it down. Some people are like visual learners. You could make a little flow chart out of this. Or some people are more language based. You could have just a series of short bullet points. Like if you go back to like the top of 90, like this is my point. It says, so here's the first direction we're given. Like when you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about them. So that's the bullet point. Find out all you can. And if you're making a little flow chart, it says, if he doesn't want to stop drinking, you know, those little flow charts got like the arrow and the box. And it says yes, no. If he wants to keep drinking, then move on. If he doesn't, it says, don't waste your time. But if he does, right, if there's any indication he wants to stop, have a good talk with him. So like if you really distill down pages 90 and 91, we've got very short bullet points of direction here. There's no need to to believe that this is more difficult than it needs to be. And what is the sum of all this direction we're giving is set up a rapport with somebody new, right? Someone who's suffering in the way that I used to suffer, whatever I'm powerless over. Have them understand, give them a little narrative. Yeah, man, I used to be the same way. Let me tell you some stories, right? And get some of those stories out of them, build some trust, and then start to introduce him to how we get better. And that's part of what is this being described in this paragraph. It says, like, okay, so call myself an alcoholic, let him know how baffled I was. And then I finally learned that I was sick. How much relief is it for someone to realize they are sick with their alcoholism, with their addiction? I don't think most people that when we talk to newcomers, we go to like treatment centers, even if they've been in treatment for a while, I'm not sure they've been told that or it's sunk in. And I can see a palpable sense of relief when I say that to people, because what do most of us think? What was my experience when I came in? It wasn't that I was sick, it's that I was a bad guy, right? That I was out of control, that I made a lot of stupid decisions. It never occurred to me that I was ill. And there's some relief in that. There's relief in two ways. One, I'm like, okay, well, now I've got an answer for why I was carrying on this way. And what's the other thing? When we're sick as humans, typically there's a way to get well, right? So I say, man, you're sick today, but I promise you can get well. So here's the next clear direction. Give them an account of the struggles you made to stop, right? All the things that didn't work, and maybe how hard it was at the beginning when it started working in 12-step recovery. Show him the mental twist David talked about, which leads us to the first drink of a spree. Remember, our mental powerlessness greater than, I'm still physically powerless over alcohol and cocaine and all other mind-altering substances. That's why I don't put it in my body. But guess why I really don't put it in my body? Because my mind tells me, you don't do that, right? Because I'm relieved mentally. All right. We suggest you do this as we've done it in the chapter on alcoholism. So how do I go about having this conversation? Well, the way that they described earlier in the book. And then they're putting the proposition to me. If he's alcoholic, he will understand you at once. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be in for recovery. It may not even mean that he out loud says that he agrees and understands. But what they're saying is, in their experience, if I relate this way, he's going to understand me probably in a way that he's never understood any other person before, talking to them about their powerlessness. And the last thing is, he will match your mental inconsistency with some of his own. So I build this rapport. I make myself relatable. It's not a sales job, guys. It's like, it's a human experience, right? It's a spiritual experience. I'm trying to say, hey, man, I'm just like you. And I was sick and now I'm well. And if you're interested, I can help you get from sick to well also.
Yeah. So back to what I said, I just like to connect dots in the big book for me. So it helps me be a better sponsor, a better person who takes someone through this work here. So top of page 92, and it talked about show him the mental twist, which leads to the first drink of a spree. So if we went back to Jim's story, we could go back to Bill's, but I won't go back to Bill's. If you want to go to Jim's story, which is on page 36, and more about alcoholism, it's in the second paragraph in the italic writing, which means, according to Joe and Charlie, let's pay attention to that. It's very important. And if I look at that paragraph, and it starts out with suddenly. So suddenly, the insanity comes suddenly, right? And then sanity comes vaguely in that paragraph. So let me read the paragraph to you in that way. Suddenly, which is insanity, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. That's a lie. That's delusional. I ordered a whiskey and I poured it into the milk. So far, he hasn't broke out in craving yet, right? Because he hasn't taken a drink. Here's the sanity part. A little bit creeped in, a little bit of sanity. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. I love that because I can relate to that. And I want to share that with them because maybe they could see the same exact thing here. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but I felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. So he took it. So that's a lie. The insanity again comes suddenly. Insanity comes Vaguely. So the delusion that I can have a sandwich or have a glass of whiskey because I have a full stomach is delusional. So that's Jim's story. So now if we would go to Fred's story on page 41 in the first paragraph, just for another relatable point, and more about alcoholism also, because we have 3 stories and more about alcoholism. And so let's finish the bottom paragraph on page 41 too, because that's one of my favorite sentences in the book. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. I love that because we go to treatment centers and they teach them how to, be careful of your triggers. Don't go around playgrounds and play things and all that crap like that, right? You know what the best trigger in the whole world is? Consciousness. That's it. Just being conscious. That's just ridiculous to say that kind of stuff. Here in more about alcoholism, I went to my hotel, lazy dressed for dinner, and I crossed the threshold. Dude, do not cross thresholds. That is a trigger. Don't do that. Those thresholds are so dangerous. No one should ever cross a threshold, right? That's ridiculous. But that's the trigger here of the dining room. The thought, okay, so the thought is not an obsession yet. It's just a thought. Crossed my mind. It would be nice to have a couple cocktails with dinner. Now is delusional. That's a lie. That was all. Nothing more. Not craving yet because he hasn't taken a drink. Nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Now he broke out in craving. So what's he going to do next? Let's finish the paragraph. Then he ordered another cocktail. Does he have a choice whether or not he takes another drink? The answer is no. I do not have a choice. I'm beyond power, choice, and control now. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. Let's skip down to the next italic writing just to kind of save on time. In page 41, second paragraph, full paragraph. As soon as I regained my ability to think, which is the next day, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Hey, good luck with that, dude. I bet you didn't really do a good job. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. I have no power, no choice, no control. I don't care how many 24 hours I have. I will not have it. This is why it's the second step. When I concede to my innermost self that I'm a real alcoholic, I should be running full speed at 2 because came to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. So sanity doesn't just show up vaguely, it shows up all the time. I can differentiate the true from the false. I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had no thought of the consequences at all. Is that relatable? That's so relatable to me. And this helps me with that thing. And the last one I want to talk about is the man of 30 on page 32 in the second paragraph. So it talks about here, halfway down the paragraph, it talks about, this started in the second paragraph. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. Of course he did. He was shaky. He had to have a drink. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and retired, he would not touch another drop. He made a decision not to take another drink. He was successful at doing that. An exceptional man. He remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. Then, wait for it, he fell victim to the belief, which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and his discipline had qualified him to take a drink as other men. Out came the carpet slippers and a bottle. In 2 months, he was in the hospital, puzzled, humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. And gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. On my own power, can I stop on my own power? That is the question I'm trying to pose to the new guy. We read about this on page 90 last week. If you want to jump back there, I know I'm bouncing around the book, but that's what I felt like doing tonight. So I apologize. In the first full paragraph, 3/4 of the way down the page, he gives us 5 directions what we're supposed to do there. It says, get an idea of his behavior. Number 1, his problems. Number 2, his background. Number 3, the seriousness of the condition. Number 4, and his religious learnings. Why? Because each individual that I work with is not going to have the same things happening to them. I might have a guy that's brand new come into the fellowship, who's never been introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous before, or I might have a guy who's a chronic relapser, or I might have a guy who went to 20 treatment centers. I'm going to approach that a different way with each individual. That's why I study the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, so I can prepare myself for these talks that I have one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball. Sorry, bro. That was a little bit lengthy, but
oh, good. All right, we'll continue with the new content. 92, first full paragraph. If you are satisfied that he is a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition surrounding that first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. Don't at this stage refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. And be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusion. If he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking, tell him that possibly he can. Tell him that possibly he can, if he is not too alcoholic. But insist that if he is severely afflicted, there may be a little chance he can recover by himself. Yep.
Yes, I have malady, which is any disease of the human body or a moral or mental defect or disorder. Queer is peculiar, odd, strange, and afflicted is troubled, tormented, or diseased.
Thanks, Ab. All right, let me jump in here to get us started on this one, David.
Please do.
So if you're satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, so by this point, if you're studying page 92, I'm going to presume you've studied the 91 pages before and a whole bunch of those Roman numeral pages, those 32 pages as well. So you should be familiar with this concept of what does it mean to be a real alcoholic? That's an expression that doesn't mean, oh, someone who drank 10 gallons of vodka a night, or they drank 24/7. No, it's not what it means. A real alcoholic, according to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I wish Ashton was with us tonight, because Ash could give us, what the medical definition of alcoholism is, which is a little different than ours, right? But according to Alcoholics Anonymous, according to this book, a real alcoholic is someone who's physically powerless over alcohol and mentally powerless over alcohol. There's that whole unmanageability part, but we're going to table that part after the dash just for a moment. So if you're satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, so in listening, and maybe I'm even doing the qualification, that's the top of, since we're bouncing around, let's go back to the top of 44. First paragraphs, and this sort of dovetails with what I was saying. Hopefully you've studied this book in order. So that's what this is presuming, because this chapter says in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism, right? We studied this. We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic or the real alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, I'm mentally powerless, I have an obsession, a compulsion to always pick up again, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take because I'm physically powerless, I break out craving, it's my allergic reaction to putting alcohol in me, you're probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. We'll see if we end up back on page 27 tonight. But back on 92, show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition surrounding that first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. I mean, we talk about this all the time. You guys have been studying with us for the last 61 weeks, have heard me say the same thing about this over and over. We know what that queer mental twist looks like. We know what that mental powerlessness looks like. I go out and I do a rager. I planned to have 2 drinks on Friday night. I didn't have 2 drinks. I had 22. I blacked out. I got kicked out of the bar. I didn't make it home till 2 a.m. I was locked out of my home and had to sleep it off in the apartment. And then on Saturday, when Michael calls me and says, "Hey man, let's go out for some drinks tonight," I say, okay. The queer mental twist. I think tonight's going to be different. Michael says we're going to go out for a couple of drinks, and I agree. This is what makes it the queer mental condition surrounding the first drink, which prevents normal functioning of the willpower. Normal functioning of the willpower would be like, dude, are you out of your mind? You know what trouble I was in last night? I was in handcuffs and I got a black eye and my girlfriend kicked me out. That would be normal functioning of the willpower. I would say, no, Michael, I'm not going out tonight. But instead I say, okay, tonight's going to be different. I'll be able to control it. Don't at this stage refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. A good buddy of ours out here, John R., says this all the time, because especially he says it to me and David, because he knows we love to smack people in the side of the head with the big book quickly. And he says, don't hit him in the head with the book in the first 5 minutes. Get to know the guy, which is what we're studying here. Establish some rapport. Let the guy trust you. If I start evangelizing and lecturing and doing all the things the book tells me not to do, I'm likely to drive this guy off and he might die before he can get help. Right? Don't smack him in the side of the head with the book in the first meeting. Save it for maybe the second. I'll give the guy an hour of my time. Goes on to say, but it does say, unless he's seen it and wishes to discuss it. Maybe he was in treatment. Maybe he's like, hey, we get this a lot. Hey, we love how you guys came in and you came out of the book and you explained the first step to us. Never heard anybody explain it like that. Can you tell me more? I love when I get those calls. We don't get enough of them. I wish we got more. Goes on to say, be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. That's a big one too. You've probably heard David say that 1,000 times in here. We say it every time we go to treatment center. We are not here to diagnose you. I cannot diagnose you. What I can do is qualify you based on what you share with me, whether or not we have a solution for you in 12-step recovery. But I can't tell you you're an alcoholic. I can tell you I'm an alcoholic. And if we have some similar stories, I might think you're gonna have a great chance of success if you hang with us here in the rooms of recovery. Let him draw his own conclusion. I don't know what's to be gained by sticking my finger in somebody's chest and letting him know he's an alcoholic. I suspect that won't go well. If he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking, tell him that he possibly can if he's not too alcoholic. And this goes right back to what I got us into on page 44. I'm just going to go back there for a second. That closing sentence in that first paragraph says, if that be the case, if you're mentally empowered and physically powerless, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So coming back to 92, if someone says, I can still control my drinking, I can say, well, maybe you can, if you're not too alcoholic. But didn't you tell me when you start drinking, you can't stop? And then the next day when you don't want to drink again, you pick up again? Say, maybe you can, but I don't know. In my experience, it doesn't usually work out so well. And at some point, I got to talk to him about the spiritual experience in God, and it can't be too far off because our buddy Howard's here. We stole this from him. We say it often. We don't know when that window of opportunity is going to slam shut. I got a finite amount of time to start helping somebody get to God. And so if they want to argue, the book already said, back on 90. If they're not into it, I can't waste my time. I got to move on. But if there's a glimmer of willingness, right, then I'm supposed to kill myself to help this guy. And the last thing it says is, but insist that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance he can recover by himself. Why? Because he's going to need a spiritual experience. And so if he asks me, okay, I agree, I'm sick, but I still think maybe I can control it, then I got to tell him, hey, man, the solution that I know, if you're sick like me and you said you were, is you got to have this spiritual experience. How frequently is that newcomer going to say, oh, cool, spiritual experience, no problem, I'll go take care of that? No, they didn't know any more than I did what the hell that meant or how on earth to get that. I need help. I need direction. I need instruction. And fortunately, got a little instruction manual right here. Tells me about the problem, the fix, and how to get from the problem to the fix. And this is the good fix. As our buddy Steve would say, this is the good dope.
Yeah, okay, so here Bill is telling me in the first sentence on this paragraph, I get to take the guy's inventory. He's giving me permission to do that because he says, if you're satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, I get to, dude, come on. We get to take our responsees inventory. It's absolutely part of my job. I need to take their inventory, because this is a disease of perception. Now, with the new guy, I am going to be, am I satisfied that he's a real alcoholic? My job here then is to follow up with begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. I'm going to finish this next sentence and I'm going to touch on two things in the big book. Show him from your own experience, not a theory, my own experience. This is not a theory. How the queer mental conditions surrounding the first drink, we're talking about the obsession, prevents normal functioning of the willpower. So on my own power, I'm going to address the malady. And David and I always, man, when we do this at treatment centers, we get everybody's attention. And you guys probably know where I'm going. I'm going to page 52 in the second paragraph in the bedevilments. How well am I doing on my own power on these bedevilments? Second paragraph, second sentence. Take the statements, turn them into questions. David, are you having trouble with personal relationships? Consider what the book is asking us here. If it was really asking questions, could you control your emotional natures? Were you prey to misery and depression? Could you make a living? Did you have feelings of uselessness? Were you full of fear? Were you unhappy? Could you seem to be a real help to other people? Now, I'm not going to dwell on all those things right here, and we did this already when we did the bedevilments. But on my own power, how well am I doing on those things? This is the malady. This is the unmanageability in my life that I wasn't even aware of. Didn't you think maybe I'm the only one here, that when I first came in, the consequences of what made me alcoholic and a drug addict?
Yeah.
I didn't know. I did not know that what David just read to us on page 44 is a qualifier. I did not know this. I thought it was because I went to jail, lost a marriage, lost a job, they got locked up a whole lot, didn't have a relationship with my kid. I thought those are the things. I did not know that once I put alcohol in my body, that I have this abnormal reaction to it, that I can't stop once they start, and once they stop, I cannot stay stopped, and that my life was unmanageable. I did not know these things. And then if we wanted to go to stress the obsession, bottom of page 28 in the doctor's opinion, the doctor writes to us and says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. I like the effect produced by alcohol. Most people do, right? I really do. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it's injurious, likely to cause no damage or any harm, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. Ask yourself that question. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. That's the question I have to ask myself. Does my life seem like the only normal one? This is the only life that I knew, so of course it is. And then it says they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience, and then the next page, the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks they see others taking with impunity, no punishment. So men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. But I remember my first drink. Does everyone else remember their first drink? Right? Everyone, raise your hand if you did. Right? Because the effect that it produced. Do you remember your first baked potato? Why not? Because it didn't produce an effect that alcohol produces in us. It is different. I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. I need to know that. And then I'm restless, irritable, or discontented unless I can again experience the sense, just the senses David and I always talk about. The ease and comfort comes once, because once I drink, once I start, it's not fun anymore. It's just not. So this is what I'm stressing with the new guy here, because I'm showing him. I'm not telling him. I'm showing him with my experience how the queer mental conditions surrounding the first drink, which is the obsession, functioning the will is not a normal functioning of my willpower. Meaning, when Nancy Reagan says just say no, that's not going to work either. Okay. Sorry, Nancy.
Or how many of us did it make you want to say yes? Right.
Oh, for
the
sure.
more they said no, more it made me say yes.
And to finish that paragraph off, back in 92, don't at this stage refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. Sorry, I'm bringing the book. I never go anywhere without my big book. And be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. So the book's kind of telling me not to brand him as an alcoholic, but I'm going to take his inventory. And if he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking, tell him he possibly can. I've done that many, many times. Maybe you can control your drinking, right? Go ahead. But dude, there's going to be consequences. You came in with some. They're going to get worse. They're not going to get better. The man at 30 didn't drink for 25 years, and he started off not where he left off, worse condition than when he left off.
Mm.
But insists that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance that he can recover by himself. So again, it started out by the top of that page of talking about the dwell on the hopeless feature. It ends that paragraph with also telling him that there's little chance to recover. Again, hopeless feature. I pray if you're new and you're in this meeting, you're a hopeless alcoholic. I hope that you don't think that somehow, someday you can drink like a normal person. If you think you're a real alcoholic, because if I got any glimmer of hope that I think I can do this somehow, someday on my own power, I'm going to pick up a drink, because it talks about in the big book, we can't have any reservations. You know what another reservation is? Someone who starts to do the work in the 12 steps of recovery, like he gets caught up on 4 and doesn't do the work, doesn't continue to do the work possibly. And maybe that's because of piss poor sponsorship, or maybe it's because he has a reservation that he thinks that he can drink on it like a normal person someday. That's my experience anyways.
Bottom paragraph on 92. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. Wow, such a powerful statement. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story, unless it will serve some good purpose. But you may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you offer a solution. You will soon have your friend admitting he has many, if not all, of the traits of the alcoholic. Ooh, does it sound like 52 where David just took us back to? If his own doctor is willing to tell him that he is alcoholic, so much the better. Even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he's become very curious to know how you got well. Let him ask you that question, if he will. Italics, tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely. If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he, more italics, he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. More italics. They were getting expensive in this part of the book. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself, and that he live by spiritual principles. Wow. Holy cow, there's a lot in that paragraph. What do you got, Abby?
Yeah, I have quite a few, so I will try to be quick.
Okay. Take your time.
Fatal, meaning deadly. Loathe is filled with disgust, averse, or reluctant. Protege is a person who is under the care and protection of another. Agnostic is a person who does not deny the existence of God, but holds that his existence is unknown and cannot be known. Atheist is denial of the existence of God, and emphatic is uttered with emphasis.
Thanks, Abby. David, why don't you get us started, but maybe let's just do a few sentences at a time, huh?
Great idea. Okay. We'll start
maybe
the first.
Through realize their predicament, maybe.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness. So David and I went back and forth on this for a very long time. We first started doing our study 4 or 5 years ago. We did it live, and then we did it on Zoom, and we did it live again, back and forth. Because the book uses the word illness, right? Because this is published in 1939. So back in 1956, the AMA, the American Medical Association, officially recognized alcoholism as a disease. And in 1987, addiction is a disease. So we went back and forth because we wanted to stay true to the text. So we stick with illness, right? We stuck with illness. I believe we did anyways. But it's a disease. It's a disease. Dis-ease, discomfort, right? Pick up a drink because I'm dis-eased. I'm discomforted. I pick up a drink. I know the effect produced by alcohol. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. I love the word fatal there because that means dead, like really, really dead. talk about the condition of the body and the mind which accompany it. So Bill is pounding home the fact for us so we understand that this is not a condition that we're going to get free of unless we find a power greater ourselves. But the point of that is like once I put alcohol in my body, I need to know this stuff that I break out of craving. And once I stop, I cannot stay stopped, which is the obsession. And the malady leads me back to the obsession. The obsession leads me back to the first drink. And once I take the first drink, I break out in craving. I can't stop. Then it says keep his attention focused mainly on, circle the word your, if you'd like to there, your personal experience. So my personal experience, whatever that is here. Explain that many are doomed who never realized their predicament. I walked around asleep, dreaming I was awake the whole time. And David uses this a lot of times. I've heard him say this in his shares. I thought I was going to get sober when I was 30. And then it was 35. You know what I mean? And I had the same experience. I just thought I was finally just grow up and stop drinking and drugging. I thought somehow I would do this. I was completely ignorant to the fact that this was an illness or a disease. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it will serve some good purpose. I think doctors tell the truth today. I think they're armed a little bit more than they have been in the past. But you may talk to him about the hopelessness of the alcoholism because you offer a solution. We have a guaranteed solution. I'm only going to pound this home for a minute, and then I'll let David jump back in. We have a guaranteed solution, 100%. It never, ever fails if you do this honestly and thoroughly. If you do this with the desperation of a drowning man, if you are willing to go to any lengths in the book that tells us, remember the beginning. You said you were willing to go to any lengths. It reminds us because we forget so easily. I forget so easily that I'm willing to go to any lengths. I need to remember that we have a guaranteed solution, that I can have permanent sobriety. I never have to take a drink again. I need to give that guy hope. And hope is described to me as a vision beyond my present circumstances. And I was a hopeless alcoholic when I got here. I am full of hope today. A vision beyond my present circumstances, meaning that I have a relationship with power today. I have a relationship with fellowship today. I have a relationship with the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous today. And only by the grace of God did I earn this? No. Do I deserve this? Not necessarily. But I have done the work, and I can have permanent sobriety because of this. Go ahead, David.
So it starts out by saying, continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. So if I've been following direction on how to go about talking to a newcomer, this is not a new concept, right? So I'm continuing to talk about this as an illness. The importance here is, guys, we become, in my experience, we've become experts on this illness. And we also become expert on how we get well, right? How we get right, how we get to God. And so it's okay. I think it's actually very beneficial that we have this foundation. We say, okay, let's make sure we're on common ground here. We are sick people. This is an illness we're battling, and we are going to treat this illness so that we get healthy, right? This is not about, hey, I was a jerk, I was an asshole, I made a bunch of bad decisions. I mean, I did all that stuff too, for sure, right? But underlying it, I'm a sick guy. Talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany that. I've already mentioned that a couple of times tonight, and we've been back to 44. Got to understand, because if the newcomer doesn't suffer this way, if they don't break out in craving when they put it in their body, if they could stop abruptly, or if they can just, drink and sometimes not drink. I mean, I talk to newcomers like this who come into meetings sometimes because maybe, they think they got a little problem, or oftentimes, it's their wife or their husband, somebody who's forcing them to go to one of those meetings. And they say, this isn't me. No, I don't know if they're telling the truth or not. Maybe they can't be honest with themselves. Maybe they are mentally and physically powerless. But sometimes people are like, I just don't drink when I don't want to drink. And I'm like, okay, well, we do not have that in common. Like, you're still welcome, hang out, there's no harm where you sticking around here and working these 12 steps, but I don't know, you might not need them. In a previous paragraph here, it said, if he sticks to the idea he can still control his drinking, tell him that he possibly can. If I'm qualifying them and they say they can stop abruptly and then they don't drink again and they only drink when they want to drink and they seem to be telling the truth, what am I going to do? Call them a liar? I got to believe them. That's their experience, but they're probably not a real alcoholic, right? Still welcome to be a part of the fellowship, but keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience, build my rapport, help him understand. I want to demonstrate the problem I had, but then I want to demonstrate the solution that I found. Explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. Now, this is a powerful line, and I want to be careful with this because I don't want to fall prey to the idea that I can scare someone into getting better. I don't really think that's effective. And my experience was if people talk to me like that, is, oh man, if you don't get better, you're going to die. Before I was ready to get better, I think that just challenged me to go out and hit it even harder, right? Because I had to believe like I was a tough guy. I wasn't afraid of death. So this is not about a scare tactic any more than it's about a sales tactic. I think it's just to say, hey man, this kills us, and I guess if it's appropriate, you could share some of those stories. David's had several people in his family die from this illness. I've had several close friends die from this illness. My best friend from high school died from alcoholism. My best friend from college died of alcoholism. And sadly, many people I have known in the rooms of recovery over the past 20 years have died from this illness. Some directly from drinking and drugging, and other people from suicide and related other health issues. Sadly, doctors will doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it will serve some good purpose. I think the doctor's job is to explain the facts of the medical condition to the patient, and they're far more qualified to do that than we are. I can't talk to someone about how it's going to affect their liver, their kidneys, or give them, throat cancer or any of those things. I'm not qualified. I'm not a physician. I can just talk to them about what I know out of this book, about the physical and the mental powerlessness and those attributes of the alcoholic on page 52. Go ahead, David.
Okay, so back bottom 92 then too, the second paragraph. You will soon have your friend admitting he has many, if not all, the traits of an alcoholic. So as long as I explained it well, and I was loving and tolerant, again, not poking the chest like David pointed out, I'm not doing that. If his own doctor is willing to tell him he's an alcoholic, so much the better. Great. And I like this paragraph, this little sentence, even though you're protege. So that's a description, right? A protege is a description of the sponsee, right? And it's really the only time they describe the name of a person we're going to work with. And here's the definition of protege, and I love this definition. A person who is guided and supported by an older and more experienced or influential person. Someone armed with the facts about themselves, right? So I sponsor people who've been sober much longer than me because they never did the work. They're attracted to what I had. I've taken them through the work. They've recovered. They carry this message. So it doesn't matter that I maybe don't have as much time as them, but maybe I have a little bit more experience than they do. And I was able to influence them because of my behavior, not just in meetings, but outside of meetings. I don't segment myself in different areas of my life. This is who I am all the time because of the grace of God. But so even though our protege may not have, back to the bottom of that page on 92, even though our protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he has become very curious to know how you got well. Let him ask you that question, if he will. And then I tell him, tell him exactly what happened to you. That is my favorite part. I love to tell them what happened to me. And I'm going to speak freely about the spiritual feature because it tells me to, not because I came up with that. It told me in the book, stress the spiritual feature freely. Like, this is the definition I got from Howard and Kathy. Religion is a set of rules. Like, okay, I'm a non-practicing Jew, shame on me, but my wife is a Catholic and we go to church. And when we go to church, there's up, down, pray, this, that. No, I don't even know what they're doing. It's more exercise than I get all week. Right, Howard? Right. All that. Spirituality is a set of disciplines. That's what I don't have. We are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in this way. Somewhere in the book is written. All right. So I'm going to stress the spiritual feature freely. I did not get myself sober. I did not remove the bedevilments from my life either. Because if I could have done that, wouldn't I have been in way better condition when I got here? I was not in good condition. If the man be agnostic or atheist, which I need to find out, remember back on page 90, we were asked those questions so I can find out a little bit more about him. Make it empathetic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. So, could he write down on a piece of paper what he needs God to be for him? I mean, or a power greater than himself, or whatever he wants to call it. We just use the word God here because it's a one syllable word, 3 letters. It works. It has changed my life, and I'm not apologizing for it. So that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes. Here's the caveat, provided it makes sense to him. That's it. It's got to make sense to the guy. So the question is at this point for me is, do I desperately need a power greater than myself to restore me to sanity, to be able to tell the truth from the false, to allow me to get free of self? Because in the unmanageability part of the second half of the first step, we're going to find pages 44, 45, a paragraph on page 52, the bedevilments I just read, and also pages 60 through 62. That describes really good for me about self and how self shows up and how self is the problem and how self must die all the time. So if I've taken him through this much work at this point and maybe pointed some of this stuff out to him, the self is the problem, that my troubles are of my own making, I can stress to him the spiritual feature freely, that I get free of self. I got free of self. That's my problem. He may not understand that, but if he sticks with me, I will make sure that he's clear on that. And then it says, the main thing that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself, and that he live by spiritual principles. Yeah, we need to talk about God, guys. It's okay. It's all right. I've sponsored people who say they're atheists, but come to find out they're really agnostic. It's okay. And what does that mean? That means is I got to let go of some of my old ideas. I mean, my prejudices, whatever I think that this God is, my upbringing in Hebrew school, catechism, whatever that was. Like, let go of all my old ideas about whatever I think the spiritual feature is, or even what religious is, to open my mind to a new way of teaching. By my sponsor, by the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, by the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, by the teaching of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just got to let go of some of my old thinking. We cover that in a whole chapter, which might be the biggest spiritual piece of literature ever written by man, called We Agnostics.
So back on 92, but you may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you offer a solution. So anytime I'm covering the first step, and we do this when we go to treatment centers, we always pound the first step, but we always give a little glimmer of hope at the end, because we don't want to leave on a bad note. We don't want to spend 55 minutes talking to these guys and gals about, hey, you're powerless and your life is a train wreck, which they know, but maybe they're really hearing for the first time. So we spend about 45 minutes talking to them about the reality of the first step, because it's important they understand that. And then we pound home the last 15 minutes about how amazing their life is going to look once they have a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening. And we use the story of Dr. Jung and Roland on page 27 to illustrate that. And so that, as the book describes here, then as we get up into 93, tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely. I go to this. I say, man, if you're anything like me, all the stuff inside you, in your thinker, in your feeler, and in your reactor, all the stuff in my head, my heart, my gut, was so awful, guys. I was just so unhappy and so agitated, so irritable and so angry and so resentful and so fearful all the time. I just walked around feeling lousy. And people said to me as I started to come into recovery, man, you don't have to live like this anymore. And yeah, they were talking about the drinking and the drug use for sure. That I wasn't going to have to be powerless and a slave to substances and behaviors anymore. But they said, man, you're going to think straight. You're going to feel better, right? All those prejudices, all those old thoughts, all those old behaviors, they're going to go away and they're going to get replaced with new ones. And I couldn't even conceive of that. David talked about this, right? To them, the alcoholic life's the only normal one. I only knew one way to live. And I couldn't really conceive that I could be a different person. But the allure of it, the promise of it sounded so good, guys. And I think more than anything, when we are talking to newcomers, I think, I can speak for David on this too. Again, we go to these treatment centers, they pick up the physical powerlessness when we explain it, a lot of nodding heads, they all relate. They pick up the mental powerlessness, a lot of nodding heads, they get it, once it's explained, they're like, yeah, they get that. Again, there's always a couple dissenters, right? Even in treatment, they're still holding on to the old idea that they can control it. But the majority of them, they pick it up. But when we get into those bedevilments in that step one talk, it is unreal. People look like we sprayed them with like a fire truck hose. Like they're just absolutely blown away. And again, it's not because we're doing this masterful job of presenting anything. We're just reading out of the book. What's amazing to these people are like, oh my God, that's exactly how I've been living. And it's in a book. Somebody wrote this thing in 1939 that was predicting exactly how I was going to be thinking and feeling and reacting. And I think that's the relief that people start to experience too, because they're like, oh man, these two clowns, these two old white guys, they know what they're talking about. And they're coming out of this book that it knows what it's talking about. So maybe, just maybe, right, they get that glimmer of hope that they can get better as well. And I think that's the business that we're in, guys, right? We're a little bit of hope dealers here. We're saying, hey, we were sick and twisted, and now we're nice and calm and serene and boring. I love being boring. And you too can be nice and calm and serene and boring, because my life prior to recovery was anything but boring. I'm certain most of you were like me. I created so much chaos. It was exhausting, right? And I don't have to live that way anymore. And neither does anybody else. And this is the promise that we give them. This is why we stress the spiritual feature freely. And why would people argue? Yes, I agree, I'm physically powerless. Yes, I agree, I'm mentally powerless. Oh my gosh, yes, I'm living in all those bedevilments. I'm like, okay, well, let's get you to a higher power. Whoa. Well, if I'm really busted and beaten and broken, maybe, just maybe, I'm willing to let go of those old prejudices, the catechism, like David said, the Hebrew school, whatever our religious upbringing was. Maybe I'm just willing to park all that stuff and crack open that door of willingness to think, maybe there's a new way that I can approach spirituality, so I can get what these guys got, so I can get what these gals got, so I can get what they were writing about back in 1939 in such masterful detail.
We're at the top of the hour. Do you want to?
Oh, closing thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
All right. Those were our closing thoughts.
Well, so what Bill's done here in the last 2 pages is he really emphasized the fact about the powerlessness of of craving and obsession of the mind, and now he's introducing this conception of God. So if you'd like to, I can have somebody need to write down, if they want to write, if they're interested, to write down what they need their God to be. Write it down. I'm not going to look at it. It's none of my business. I don't really care. Just as long as it's powerful enough for you to get free of self. So that's just my take on that, and that's my experience with that.